A lot of people think that the only exercise that they can do for training the side glutes is something like this, right? Where you're standing sort of awkwardly in empty space near a cable stack, where you loop a cable around the ankle and where you sort of kick out to the side like this, so where your leg ends up kind of here and the cable travels with you. But this exercise runs into one major issue, which is that it's really unstable, at least the way that most people are doing it. So instead of thinking that you have to force yourself to do this to train your side glutes, today I'm going to show you one exercise that I've been playing around with recently that I think is one of the most fantastic side glute exercises that you can do. And before I explain it, first of all, this is not a bad exercise. And many people who, let's say, are on the relatively less advanced side of the spectrum can do this exercise with great success. But if any of you watching this are substantially muscular and you've built up a lot of strength over time, an exercise like this, just because of the fact that you're kicking out here, you might not have anything else to support your body. This exercise often for strong people becomes an exercise of trying not to basically fall over and trying to balance yourself, which is oftentimes why strong people present as very weak in these instances. It's not because they're weak, it's because they're so strong that they can't actually use the loads that their side glutes would actually allow them to use if they were to have stability, i.e. maybe something they could actually place on their hips to sort of block themselves from falling over. So to solve this issue, and also to train the side glutes at a more stretched muscle length, what we can do is a single leg sideways hinging variation. Now, this may look like somewhat of a weird exercise to some of you, but just stick with me. I want to talk through the setup, the execution, and the rationale. So first of all, I like to do this inside of the Smith machine. The reason being, the Smith machine is a constrained path of motion, so it's highly stable. It's not going to sway side to side. And in the Smith machine, you have a strong ability to anchor your non-working leg, the leg that's off the ground, and also the hand that is not actually holding the load. And when you do it this way, all of the different parts of your body, sort of in stark contrast to something like this, are highly supported by the external environment so that you can just focus on output through the target tissue. Now, this variation is also unique because as you shift into the working leg, right, and the intent is basically to turn your pelvis, to turn your belly button toward and away from the working leg. We're not trying to make this some kind of reverse lunge or some kind of curtsy lunge or anything similar. We're trying to basically just find a way to maintain somewhat of an upright torso as we hinge in and out of the working side hip. And this is going to be really important for training the side glutes because exercises, let's say like this one, like a kick out, or even like a seated abduction machine, like the classic one that many of you are probably familiar with when you just kick your legs out. Those are great exercises, but they're never actually going to train the fullest muscle length in the most lengthened position of the side glutes. And so the idea behind this modified sort of sideways hinging variation is essentially this. You're anchoring the load via your hand, you're stabilizing via your opposite leg and your non-working hand. And then what you're doing, if you can picture this being your pelvis and the right leg is the working leg, is you're going to start a little bit hinged forward just because you kind of have to. But what you're trying to do is basically just keep this leg relatively static, and you're trying to basically just turn your pelvis in toward your hips, right? And if you think about this, this is basically no different in some ways than doing a cable kick out, at least from a muscle recruitment standpoint. The only difference is instead of kicking your leg outward and backward, sort of towards like maybe this side of your hips, what you're doing is you're changing the motion, or really what is doing the moving for the majority of the motion at least, to the pelvis. And when you open the backside of the pelvis in this way, where you're turning toward the working leg, all of these fibers of the side glutes are going to get really stretched out. So the main targets of this exercise are going to be the posterior or back side of the glute med that has fibers that splay all like my hands are splaying now. And then also a little bit of the backside of the glute min. Now, this isn't just like a purely side to side thing, so keep in mind that there is a little bit of hinge in the hips and you are leaning and tilting in toward one side. So again, I want to repeat this and make this very clear. This exercise, not a bad exercise. You can make it work in some instances, in some contexts. The seated abduction is a much more stable variation of this kind of variation if you're able to lean back on your seated abduction to train the side glutes. However, what I would say is that the exercise that we've gone over today is actually an exercise that is complementary to the seated abduction, because the seated abduction is going to train a relatively shorter muscle length of those side glutes. And the last thing that I want to say is there seems to be this sort of cultural tilt where girls lean into training side glutes and guys lean away from training side glutes. And just speaking to you guys specifically who think that training your glutes is unnecessary or that it's just for girls, what I want to point out is just that your side glutes are really, really important muscles from the perspective of daily living. And making your side glutes strong is not only going to actually allow you to, let's say, take stress off of your spine during any kind of daily activity like walking or just standing, but it's also going to actually allow you, in my personal opinion, if you're training all these other muscle groups, quads, hamstrings, adductors, super hard, it's going to allow you to actually train those tissues with, in the long term, I think a better orthopedic health, better joint health. And what I really mean by that is just more sustainability in training and more strength through all of the muscles of the hip. So if you're a guy and you're kind of skeptical of the side glute training stuff, just start to do it, start to actually reap the benefits of making the outsides of your hips stronger. And what you'll realize is that it's not just your outside hip that feels stronger. It's all other motions that are going to feel like more locked in, more stable, like you have a stronger foundation off of which you can do something like a squat or a leg press or a deadlift. And again, if you just think about a very simple example how important these muscles actually are, stand on one leg, and what you'll feel and what you'll notice is that standing on one leg requires you to shift into that side, right? So these muscles on the side are going to be the ones that essentially prevent your pelvis from just falling that way. And we're essentially just training that motion with the exercise that I displayed and described here today. So if you've never done this exercise before, give it a little bit of time. It's going to feel a little bit clunky at first to sort of work through the torso coordination, but once you do, I promise it'll be worth it.